This is update for December 21, 2024, day 1032 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up for December 20th and December 19th. So I'm gonna, as you can see, discuss macroeconomy, and then I'm gonna switch to situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. It will be pretty short, and I wanna briefly discuss Japan. There's new data came out that shows that the inflation in Japan is not subsiding. As you can see, the core CPI went from 2.3 to 2.7, and just regular CPI went from 2.3 to 2.9. So what this really means is it does look that inflation is coming back across the globe, not as aggressively as it used to be, let's say, in second half of 21, beginning of 2022. But nevertheless, it's very clear it's about 2% target, which is a typical target that central banks, or at least Western central banks, have around the world. And there's open admission by the US central bank that they accept that interest rate is going to be more than 2% for some time, for a couple of years. So it doesn't seem that they are preoccupied with inflation, which is what I mentioned in prior video, and really focus on maintaining labor market, and also addressing potentially in the US commercial real estate. I don't know how to call it. It's not really a bubble. It's I would say a potential disaster that can happen, and it's really driven because the office space has huge vacancies in the U.S. Because of the new trend, work from home, which is actually very. I would argue that this trend is net positive for society, and allows actually to reduce waste and save a lot of money, because people or employees don't waste time driving to work or going on whatever public transportation to work. So that really reduces consumption of fuel, consumption of everything. And so this is quite a bit of net savings for the companies as well. And even though there is drive in US, it appears, to push people back to the offices, it's not going to work, simply because the net savings are tremendous for companies. And so they have huge financial incentive not to bring back everyone. Probably some people will be back, but generally speaking, this in some ways it's really increase in productivity in society, even though it doesn't appear on the surface and it's not very direct one, but because people are able to save, those expenses, and companies are saving expenses on the office space. So net, you have positive result for the society, and so it's very unlikely that this office space is going to be rented in the U.S. And so the problem is that there's a lot of debt that's underlying this office space that's maturing, that's coming due to be paid, or they never paid, just for those that commercial real estate debt, it's never paid, it's always refinanced. So basically you just always rolling it over. So it's like permanent debt in some ways. It's just you need at some points refinance it, and that's the only risk is refinancing. Otherwise it always sort of underlies this office buildings. And so there is a problem because attempting it to refinance that debt at much higher interest rates will lead to significant number of defaults, which probably going to happen regardless, just simply because there is not occupancy is not there. So sooner or later, and it's not coming back, because there was a hope that it's going to come back, but it's not coming back in any meaningful way, and it's very unlikely to come back, as I explained. And so this really means that there's a huge problem that the U.S. Central Bank is facing with this refinancing and potential defaults. And because it's very easy for the lender to default. There's no downside essentially. So you just return the property to the bank, and you don't have any liability. You don't carry any risk. So in some ways, the way these office buildings were sort of owned, they were not really owned. They were sort of rented from the banks. And I'm talking about sort of economic nature of transaction, not formally. This owners, they borrowed money, they purchased the building, but the point is they never intended to repay that debt, and that is very close to the sort of value of the building. So the equity is very low, and so this so-called owners or renters, they would really re-rent that to to specific businesses and so on. So just essentially just intermediary that managing relationship with the banks by borrowing money, and also not even really in most cases managing the property, because that's also outsourced. And so they didn't have any downside, and it's easy for them to just basically say, thank you very much. Here's your building to the bank. And the problem is that banks then they will have to realize those losses. And because most banks don't have enough capital, so there could be significant wave of bankruptcies among the banks, or so that can in some way potentially can trigger similar effect to what happened in 2008 in the US, except that time it was in residential real estate, so basically like homes that owned by regular people, versus this case in this time around, it's more like office space that's driving it. So I think part of the reason, I would say one of the main reasons that U.S. central bank is reducing interest rate is because it attempts to cushion this blow to the so-called renters of the office space, and then to the banks eventually, because by saving these renters or so-called owners, they're helping banks. And so if you reduce risk of refinancing these loans, so the hope is there will be fewer of these owners who just simply gonna default and return buildings back to banks. I think that's really the primary driver of what is going on behind the decrease in interest rates in US, because if you look at the data sort of suggests that interest rates should not be going down in the US by any means, and should at the minimum remain at the same level. But sort of decisions are made despite the data, and so that really suggests that there's other sort of considerations and drivers behind this decision, which is what I explained. And the reason I mention Japan is because, as I mentioned before many times, is that Japan used to be a very large provider of capital to the U.S. Essentially, most of what Japan would earn, then they would then turn around and reinvest in the U.S. market. So basically, providing capital for those loans. Let's put it this way: not only loans, but it's everywhere, all equity as well, and so on. But the main point is most of it goes into that. So Japan would buy U.S. debt, including this commercial real estate, would be part of that chunk of debt that they would buy. And including also U.S. governmental borrowings. So because they don't have capital, because the way this interest rate is connected to all of that is because that really means that Japanese central bank cannot reduce its interest rates. Right now it's 0.25. And U.S. has reduced, U.S. central bank reduced the interest rate to 4. So basically it's between 4.5 and 4.25. So this really means that this difference between the two rates, 0.25 and let's say 4.25, become smaller. So that really means that Japanese investors have fewer incentives to keep their capital in the US. And on top of it, I mentioned this before, Japan now having a negative trade balance, so they by nature also need to repatriate their capital from US included. So this really means that in the US, the interest rates for governmental borrowings and general interest rates, because everything is then sort of, let's say, driven by this governmental borrowings. And so that interest rates are going to go up, and specifically the ones that are not controlled by U.S. central bank, because U.S. central bank essentially controls three months borrowing. So that's really this 4.5. That affects mostly that very sort of specific type of interest rate. But for example, if U.S. government wants to borrow for 10 years, for 5 years, for 7, for a year, that's already not directly controlled by U.S. central banks, and those interest rates are going up, and even more so the 10-year, which really means that investors starting to sort of lose faith that inflation will be under control, and also fiscal situation is going to be under control in the U.S. Actually, sort of tying to this, this new sort of, there was a couple of days ago, there was a fight in the U.S. Parliament where there was essentially a power struggle between incoming president and outgoing president, where basically the outgoing president wanted to have significant increase in deficit spending, and the incoming president sort of didn't want that, but then also he wanted to increase debt limit by I think couple trillions, or I don't remember exact number, but it was a significant number, basically, or 5 trillion. Don't recall exact number. But what this really means is that, and there was just a game who's going to be responsible for this debt increase. So the new president wanted to sort of like, okay, you increase debt limit right now, so that it goes, so that the current administration is going to be responsible for increasing debt limit. And then current administration obviously didn't want that, so they wanted to that limit to be increased under new administration sometime in March. So what ended up happening that that limit was not increased, and so essentially current administration in some way, so it's kind of like was I would say compromised, but in this key question, it's clearly that the current administration won. And so this responsibility for that increase now goes to the Trump administration that's incoming in January. And from the fact that this new administration wanted to increase that limit, it really suggests that they are not really planning to address all of these fiscal problems, because otherwise you really don't need increases in that, because you really need, first thing, to address the problem, you need to stop increasing your debt. I think it's a very logical sort of conclusion, and it doesn't seem that that's really the plan. I think the plan, again, there's no very clearly sort of articulated in straightforward manner plan, but the plan is sort of, okay, let's just borrow more and hopefully then reduce regulations, and hopefully the growth will be tremendous, as the new president says, I guess. And so that growth somehow will basically help to pay off debt, which is a completely unrealistic scenario. It never works. It will not work this time around, but it will lead to significant inflation. And I think the market is starting to sense that, and that's why you see this increase in the long-term borrowing. So basically what I mean is like 10-year, when US government wants to borrow for 10, 7, 20 years, 30 years, that those interest rates are going up for that reason, because the investors understand if they lend that money for 10 years, that the inflation will be higher, and in general uncertainty about that inflation is as well, and so they really want to have high interest rates, so they're not going to lose money on when they borrow, when they lend, to the U.S. government. So this is, let's say, situation nutshell. So it doesn't seem that there will be sort of a realistic solution to the U.S. fiscal situation, and so most likely it will sort of forces of nature will resolve that situation when interest rates will go significantly higher, and that will sort of force basically significantly will reduce ability to borrow. And I think that's sort of path of least resistance based on sort of on what I just discussed and most likely scenarios. So we'll see what happens there, but that's, I think, where we're heading. Now, I want to discuss a little bit about situation with Russian economy, because there's a lot of problems as well. And what happened in Russia is there was significant pushback from the, I wouldn't even call it business community, because it's fully controlled by the Russian state. So they're not really, I would say, independent businesses. This is sort of like a quasi-governmental entities. But there was significant uproar, pushback against further increasing interest rates in Russia, which Russian central bank was intending to do by taking interest rate from 21 to 23%. And what ended up happening, that the interest rate remained at 21. And the reason why they're complaining is because simply all of these entities, the business entities, they cannot borrow, or they can borrow, but they cannot repay loans at 21 or 23%. So this really sort of has effect of like freezing Russian economy, and specifically economy that's not doing, sort of not supporting directly war effort, because that economy has money from the state budget, and so they're not really concerned about anything. But it was really making a big threat to the export oriented companies, so that they may stop exports. And so that really forced the hand of the Russian central bank. So they realized that they will basically may implode Russian export sector with this increasing interest rates, and so that will really basically destroy Russian economy, because the source of wealth is export of natural resources. So that's really what feeds Russian economy, what feeds war machine, and so that really, if that were to happen, then you basically going to destroy war machine. And so decision apparently was that Russia will tolerate even higher inflation, and that's most likely scenario. And at the same time, the the construction real estate sector is grinding to a halt in Russia as well. It's not there, but it's moving in that direction. I'll sort of be more specific. And it's because the consumers or borrowers who want to buy their personal homes, they cannot obviously afford to pay interest rate at 20. It's more than 21, because then the banks add their own margin to this 21, because that's what they borrow from central bank at 21. Then they, or from the market, because that really sets the market rate, and then they need to add their own margin, would be another couple percent. So really the margin, the full interest rate to the borrower is already definitely 23, and probably more like 24, 25. And so pretty much nobody can afford, unless you want to go bankrupt, to buy your home at that interest rate. And so that really, what this really means, that construction industry is being sort of like a frozen. And but the whole point of all of this is that the resource through high interest rates. So in some ways, Russian government figured out how to extract resources for the war effort from the economy without actually switching to sort of traditional, I would say, communist or socialist approaches, where you basically getting this the food cards or whatever it is. So you're not switching to rationing, because that really destroys economy in very short order. And so they fully aware of that risk, and so they so far they were successful in avoiding into going into this sort of communist system of the war effort, and actually keeping this sort of quasi-capitalist system that really allows, that is more efficient by its nature. And so this actually stretches ability of the war machine to continue much longer. That doesn't mean that the economies sort of can withstand anything, all sort of abuses, but this allows to sort of squeeze more juice from the apple, or whatever, from the lemon, whatever you want to say, through basically market mechanism. And that, I would say, it's very clever approach, and that really part of the sort of rush, this unexpected Russia's ability to sort of to maintain economy despite the war, despite the sanctions, despite all of the expectations that things are going to fall apart. Just kind of testament to the strengths of the market forces, that they can really overcome a lot of problems. And I would say that's really driven by purely by Russian president. So that's really what's happening in Russia. At the same time, for example, there was I think meeting of governor of Kursk region with the refugees who basically fled the war in Kursk region, and now they don't have anything. They're essentially homeless, and they were asking, okay, we would like to get some help. And the answer was very actually unusually blunt from the governor. He stated that literally we don't have any money in the budget, but not only in the Kursk region budget, but in general in a state budget, because everything goes to war effort. So we cannot give you anything. Tough luck. You need to survive. You need to figure out on your own how to survive. So that's really actually blunt, very frank admission of what's really actually going on with the sort of Russian budget and generally Russian economy in some ways. And by the way, just to sort of compare this, what's going on in Ukraine, so people who also flee war on Ukrainian side, they also don't get anything from Ukrainian government. They basically evacuate you to new sort of territory and just say, okay, well, now you're on your own, no support, no financial support, no nothing. And so what really is happening as a result of this completely misguided policy, in my view, is that majority of these people who were sort of evacuated from the war zone, then they actually return to the territories that are captured by Russia and returning sort of to live and work in Russian occupation. So that's again just another example how everything is completely mismanaged by the Ukrainian political top and Ukrainian government. Now let's switch to situation on the battlefield. And I'm gonna do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, starting from the very north. And we're gonna move to Kursk region of Russia, where things more or less the same. Slowly but surely, Russian forces are squeezing Ukrainian forces out, and I would say that just that's where the process is going. Eventually, Ukraine will lose its bridgehead in Russia. Let's put this way. Now let's look at the situation northeast of Kharkiv. Things are quiet here. Nothing major is going on there. Now let's move south to the north Lugansk section of the front line. Things here are actually also somewhat on the quieter end. I can speculate that Russian military doesn't have enough resources, which is probably true, but at the same time, there's a lot of problems on the Ukrainian side where you don't need that many resources to actually make advances at this point. So, but for now, situation somewhat stable. By stable, I mean there is no losses of major like villages or major like locations. There are, I would say, pretty much never-ending losses of small sort of fields where, or small agricultural land where Russian forces are advancing. Now let's look at North Donbass, and the northern part quiet. There's not much going on here. Again, because of the lack of resources on the Russian side. The southern part in the Chasiv Yar area, there's still that fight going on. Apparently, Russian side ran out of resources, so without actually managing to fully capture that bricklaying factory. But we'll see if I'm pretty certain that they will regroup and they will eventually launch another attack to basically finish capturing this factory. But so far, Ukrainian forces managed to hold on. Now let's move to the central Donbass section of the front line where things are the worst for Ukraine. And the area that's not sort of doing well is this area south of Pokrovsk. And then this whole area around Kurakhove all the way to Velika Novosilka. So essentially, Velika Novosilka is most likely going to be lost. Not immediately, but in, let's say, not so distant future, probably in a month or two. And Kurakhove and this whole area is in the process of being lost already. But let's just look first at this area, sort of south and southwest of Pokrovsk. So this is actually a map from December 18, as you can see, but there's fairly small change since then. Is that Russian troops managed to capture a village where where this white arrow is, and then they turned north from that area and advanced a little bit north, and essentially attempting to capture this whole area around this village Solona. So this is where sort of the fight is going on, and then also they are attacking Vovkov and Peshana. So this is essentially this sort of situation in development. It slowly but surely is going in a negative direction for Ukraine, but there's no significant losses, let's put this way. And then still Ukrainian forces are still managing to hold on to this Zelenivka, but it's essentially lost. They are basically on the western outskirts of this village, and it's gonna be lost pretty quickly. Um, Now let's look at the area around Kurakhove and Velika Novosilka, where things are sort of advancing in decisively negative way. So Russian troops managed to at, advance from Zelenivka. So um, they basically established bridgehead on the other side of this sort of stream, a small river. On the basically it's eastern side of this river, and they managed to then started advancing towards this village Ulakly. So they're not far away from there, and then also they advance in the western direction. This sort of, I would say, northwestern, probably best way. That's northwestern direction. So they basically covering up a little bit, expanding their base of their attack essentially, and then then on the sort of eastern side of this um, semi pocket is essentially Ukrainian forces are engaging in rear guard action, where they slowly but surely retreating, basically evacuating this whole area. And then it seems that this the power station Kurakhove will be lost without really major fight, as you can see, the risk is really for creating pocket here, and this is sort of textbook approach by Russian command, no difference than in other situations. And then also Russian troops almost managed essentially control this village Shevchenko. So as you can see, there is pretty narrow bottle here, bottleneck, and so it's not much is there's not many options left for Ukrainian forces, but essentially withdraw out of this pocket or bottle, let's put this way. Then situation sort of remains negative around Velika Novosilka. I mentioned that Russian troops managed to capture this Novy Kamar, which essentially means that Velika Novosilka is not going to be Ukrainian forces will not be able to successfully defend Velika Novosilka for a long time. Most likely, Russian troops will try to cross this also small river here and start moving in the western direction, and most likely in the northwestern along the river. Basically, they will try to move on the eastern and western side of this river, and so essentially this is going to get lost as well. So this whole area from south of Pokrovsk to Velika Novosilka, this is essential. This whole section of the front line is collapsed, but in slow motion. I'd say I was expecting somewhat faster collapse, but it's collapsing, but in slow motion. This is how it looked on the 18th. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line, and things here are more or less quiet again for the same reason. There's not enough resources on Russian side to have any active sort of action on this front line. And then I'll finish with the front line along the Dnipro River. Actually, there's a surprise here. I don't have any reasonable explanation, but Russian troops attempted major landing operation. So they attempted to establish bridgehead, sort of this northeast of Kherson on the western side of Dnipro River. So far, Ukrainian forces managed to completely destroy Russian attacking forces. They did not even get to the western side of the Dnipro River, but it is sort of new and very, I would say, alarming development for Ukraine. So I don't have any logical explanation, because this, opening up this bridgehead doesn't make much sense for Russia, because it's very clear Russia does not have enough resources, and even if they were to establish this bridgehead, they don't have enough resources to basically exploit that and advance deeper into Ukrainian territory. But so, nevertheless, they try. Maybe that's sort of Russia's equivalent of what Ukrainian command was doing with that bridgehead on the eastern side that eventually was abandoned, and just to kind of show that, oh, we managed to establish something. I don't know. But this one thing is clear, that those was not sort of small scale attack, was pretty major attempt with employing significant resources by the Russian military. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.